Is that sound comfortable or too boomy? Too boomy? All right. Good. So tonight is the third and last lecture of this particular series. As I said in the first lecture, it's just a short series of 3 lectures this month, every week. Starting from next month, we shall begin the longer introductory course again, which is composed of 6 or 7 lectures. And just for your notebooks, that begins on March the 12th. So if any of you want to continue this introductory series, please do come along then. And it'll take place, that series of lectures will take place not here, but at the Friends House in the Euston Road. Friends House, right opposite Euston Station. So you'll be most welcome if you want to come. Last week, we went into the invocation of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo quite deeply. And I hope those of you who were at that lecture gained some idea of the workings of this invocation, which is the fundamental practice of Nichiren Shoshu Buddhism. And that is also known, the invocation of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo is known as the first great secret law. Secret in that it was known only to the Buddhas until it was revealed to everybody by Nichiren Daishonin when he declared Nam-myoho Renge Kyo on the 28th of April, 1253. So today we're going to talk about the second of those 3 great secret laws, which is the object of devotion, or Gohonzon. Gohonzon. There is a third great secret law, which we shan't be dealing with in any lecture, which is known in Japanese by the word kaidan. Kaidan meaning sanctuary. The sanctuary in which the object of devotion is enshrined. And those 3 great secret laws, as they're known, make up the one great law of the lotus, Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. So that third great secret law wasn't finally realized until the 12th of October 1972, when the final great sanctuary for the main Gohonzon, or object of devotion, was built at the foot of Mount Fuji in Japan, in accordance with the will of Nichiren Daishonin more than 700 years before. So Nichiren Daishonin said, when the time is right, you should build the sanctuary at the foot of Mount Fuji in the most beautiful country in the land. And as I say, this was achieved on the 12th of October 1972, nearly 700 years later. So of course, that sanctuary for the Dai Gohonzon, or the supreme object of devotion, had to be built in such a way that it provided facilities for people from all over the world who practice Nam-myoho Renge Kyo to come to visit that supreme object of devotion and express their determinations and prayers in front of it. And of course, such a building must be great in size as well as in beauty. And it wasn't until 1972 that the followers of Nichiren Shoshu Buddhism rose to a figure where such a building could be constructed and completed. So today, as I say, we're going to talk about the second law, which is the object of devotion itself. So if you think about those 3 great secret laws, they have a complete cohesion. That is to say, you chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo to the object of devotion, which is the second of the laws, in the sanctuary. So the Gohonzon is available to all of us. anyone who practices Nichiren Shoshu Buddhism, provided they are willing to make the commitment of protecting and practicing to the Gohonzon, may receive one. In which case, of course, one's own bed sitter or one's own sitting room or wherever becomes the kaidan or sanctuary so far as our Gohonzon is concerned. This is like the center point of one's devotions and is known as the Buddha's land. And the Buddha's land, because of one's devotions, spreads further and further outwards from that main sanctuary. So there is a complete cohesion between the three laws which make up the one law of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. So to get on to talk about the Gohonzon in some detail, in the early days of Nichiren Daishonin's teachings, after he declared Nam-myoho Renge Kyo in 1253, people practiced without the Gohonzon. And the reason for this was that, of course, they were at the very beginnings of their understanding of this faith. Today, we may practice for 3 months, or 6 months, or 9 months, or however long it may take us to make up our minds to commit ourselves to Buddhism. And receiving the Gohonzon is like that commitment. But of course, today also, we have an amazing amount of facilities available to us to help us to understand Buddhism, which were not available to people in those days. We have books of many different sorts. There are many members who practice for far longer than we may have done, and so on and so on. So therefore, the teachings can be made available very much more easily. Also, of course, there are communications today which didn't exist in the 13th century. And perhaps most important of all, just as the Buddha said, people are more and more having the intellectual capacity to see the need for Nam-myoho Renge Kyo and to place it in its right context in this universe in which we exist. So after some long time, Nichiren Daishonin then began to give a few Gohonzons, objects of devotion, to certain of his followers who were advancing the best in faith. In other words, who would be able to appreciate the need to have a Gohonzon in order to help them with their practice and with the advance of the reformation of their lives, which the practice involves. And these Gohonzons were developed more and more, still comparatively few in number, until finally, in 1279, on the 12th of October, Nichiren Daishonin inscribed what is known as the Dai Gohonzon, the Supreme Gohonzon, which, as I said, is enshrined and still is enshrined at the foot of Mount Fuji, at the head temple of Nichiren Shoshu, which is called Taisekiji. So this was a gradual progression, and the inscription of the Dai Gohonzon by Nichiren Daishonin was really the culmination of his purpose in life, his mission, if you like. Because through the inscription of the Dai Gohonzon, he was able to perpetuate Nichiren Shoshu Buddhism into the future after he died. The reasons for that I'll explain a little later. So a Gohonzon is in fact a piece of parchment paper, or it can be made of wood. And it is the central object of our practice and can hang with ease in any sort of room. Therefore easily available to everybody. Those that are made of parchment are nowadays printed by a woodblock process which is supervised by the priests. The original of those prints being inscribed by the high priest of the day. So not so long ago, last year, the 66th high priest died, and we now have the 67th high priest, who is called Nikken Shonin, who lives, of course, at the head temple in Taisekeji. And he now is the one to whom the heritage of being able to inscribe a Gohonzon has been passed. And this has come down all the way through the generations and the centuries from Nichiren Daishonin's time to today. When they make the Gohonzon from wood, this is a process which is quite always kept quite secret, but this is the process where they take the inscription transfer it from the original parchment onto a piece of camphor wood. Camphor wood being most resistant to attacks from insects. And usually where a Gohonzon is of such a nature that it's going to be used by a great many people, i.e. in a temple or a community center, they will make that wood block, the actual wood block, immediately after the parchment has been inscribed. And that is then kept until the parchment Gohonzon wears out, which it naturally does in the end, and then it is replaced by the wooden one. So that's just a few bare facts to begin with for those of you who have not so far really encountered or known much about what a Gohonzon is. So I should now go on to explain to you as best I can why a Gohonzon is necessary. Why is it that an object of devotion is important to this practice? And indeed, as Nichiren Daishonin explained, is important for a human being in any case. So, first of all, the word Gohonzon, Go is an honorific title in Japanese, like saying the honorable, say, and Honzon means object of devotion. So, Gohonzon means the honorable object of devotion. Japanese people make it even more polite because they say usually Gohonzon sama, which means Mr. the Honorable Object of Devotion. Nichiren Daishonin, in one of his most important writings, called the Gohonzon, the object of devotion, Kanjin no Honzon Sho. Kanjin no Honzon Sho, which means the object of devotion for observing one's mind or life. And that actually sums up what the purpose of this Gohonzon is. It is the object of devotion by means of which you can observe your life and all its workings. So it was Nichiren Daishonin's wisdom which brought him to the point where he realized that a human being needs an object of devotion. And furthermore, if you don't give a human being an object of devotion, he'll make one up for himself. So we can see that in many instances. Of course, we can see it actually, those of us who practice Christianity or have practiced Christianity, in the history of the Christian church. It was one of the great commandments that no graven image would be made of God. But on the other hand, human beings down the centuries couldn't resist making some sort of image. So they made an image, perhaps of Mary, Jesus' mother, or of the cross, or of Christ actually on the cross. There was a need or a desire to concentrate one's life on something. And this is a natural human instinct which Nichiren Daishonin quite well understood. So Shakyamuni Buddha, first recorded Buddha in the history of this world, and lived, as you know, 3,000 years and more ago, he also said, "Do not worship me, worship the law," or words to that effect. But nevertheless, down through the ages, from his time, human beings again couldn't resist this desire to make something concrete to concentrate their minds on. So all over the Far East, one finds statues of the Buddha, lying down, resting, meditating, laughing, in all sorts of different positions. Some are made of gold, some of turquoise, some studded with precious jewels, other made of marble, and so on. So there is, you can't get away from it, an innate desire in a human being to have an object of devotion. And most religions, in one way or another, have reached that conclusion that an object of devotion is necessary. Of course, in the primitive religions, tribal religions, this was very obvious. They made totem poles, strange-looking statues in wood, and so on. So it is man's need, and as I say, if he doesn't find one through the wisdom of someone else, he'll make one up. So if you look now at this materialistic age, which began perhaps, you could say, 250 to 300 years ago, as man became disillusioned to a great extent with the religions of the day of our contemporary times, he turned his attention to other forms of objects of devotion. It may have been money, it may have been sport, it may have been girlfriends, it may have been a pet dog, but one way or another, they always struggled to concentrate their lives on something. And of course, the trouble with these objects of devotion in this materialistic age is that they're most impermanent, aren't they? If you make your girlfriend your object of devotion, and you adore her unceasingly for a year or even 2 years, you never know quite what's going to happen next. She may meet someone else, she may become sick, she may have an accident. So many things can happen to make that object of devotion shake and even disappear. People behave in amazing ways with their objects of devotion. And I never fail to remember when I give this lecture that when I first gave a lecture on the Gohonzon, which was in Japan quite a few years ago, just that very day there'd been an article in the Japanese newspapers about a businessman whose passion was golf. And he'd been playing golf in Brazil. And his golf ball went onto a tee and disappeared into the bushes, the other side. And when he went to fetch it, he couldn't find it. And he realized from some giggling that a small boy had taken it. And as he walked towards him, the boy ran away. And this man pulled a pistol out of his pocket and shot him. Now, that, I mean, is utterly insane and almost in a terrible way laughable. But the fact is that that man's object of devotion was his game of golf. His life was totally taken up by it. And I dare say, when you think about it, you perhaps know people whose lives are totally taken up in some way with perhaps a sport. It affects every moment of their lives. They think of it all through the week. If possible, they try to make their business appointments around games of golf. It takes precedence often over their families and totally absorbs their life. until something changes. Maybe they get a bit too old for it. Or maybe, for some reason known only to themselves, their passion turns from golf to a girlfriend, or to sports cars, or whatever. But this is innate in human life, that mankind needs an object of devotion, and goes to an extreme extent to invent one for himself, and then is quite absorbed by that devotion until something changes. So Nietzsche and Daishonin recognized this, and in inscribing the Gohonzon, his determination was to give people an object of devotion that was absolute and unchanging, constant. In other words, an object of devotion that could become the prime point of any human being's life, and which would never change, would always be there, always constant, constant in its meaning, constant in its appearance. Something which, if you devote your life to it, will never let you down, never become sick. Something that you can never get tired of, because the depth of the meaning of it is so all-embracing. So this is what he set out to do when he inscribed this piece of parchment called the Gohonzon.